Welcome to this explainer. All right, let's jump right into this, because if there's one single thing you take away from our deep dive into the International Baccalaureate lecture notes and planning frameworks today, let it be this. Effective IB planning is never, ever an accident. It is a highly deliberate design. Today, we're going to explore the really fascinating mechanics behind how educators structure learning, and we're going to look at it from top to bottom, spanning all the way from those overarching, multi-year programs down to the absolute nitty-gritty of daily unit planning. Whether you're a seasoned coordinator or just kind of curious about how world-class education is structured, understanding this macro to micro relationship is a real game changer. It shifts our perspective entirely from just looking at what is being taught to really understanding how the entire educational experience is engineered from the ground up.
So, here is our quick roadmap for today. We're going to unpack the three main pillars identified in the source literature: constructivism, authenticity, and agency, and we'll examine each one at both the macro program level and the micro unit level. Finally, we'll look at how these pillars fundamentally reshape how we assess our students.
Okay, Section 1. Core aims of IB planning. The deliberate design.
We're going straight to the epistemological roots of the International Baccalaureate to figure out what is actually driving the curriculum. At its core, the IB's pedagogical approach centers entirely on a continuous cycle of inquiry, action, and reflection. But to make this cycle actually work in a real-world school, three primary aims, constructivism, authenticity, and agency, have to seamlessly interlock. Now, these aren't just trendy educational buzzwords. They're the foundational principles that literally must be present across all years of a school's program, driving both the big-picture strategy and the everyday lesson plans.
Moving on to Section 2. Constructivism, building deep knowledge.
Let's see how this first foundational pillar gets built. Constructivism operates on this core idea that knowing and doing simply cannot be separated, right? Students aren't just empty vessels waiting around to be filled with facts. Instead, they actively construct their knowledge through interactions with their environment. Learning is this highly dynamic process of building, not just memorizing. Think about it. When a student is actively figuring something out, making mistakes, and adjusting their understanding on the fly, that knowledge embeds itself far, far deeper than if someone just handed them the answer. So how does this actually look in practice? Well, at the macro, program level, constructivism demands intense collaborative planning. Teachers are working across different subjects to ensure horizontal and vertical articulation. Vertical articulation just means the learning builds logically from year to year, while horizontal articulation makes sure concepts are connecting across different subjects at the exact same time. It's like a giant puzzle. Then, at the micro, unit level, this grand theory translates into very specific lesson planning frameworks, like the famous 5E model, which guides that daily discovery. And the 5E model is fantastic because it shows exactly how a big theory turns into concrete hands-on classroom discovery. First, you engage to spark that initial curiosity. Maybe you show a video of a forest fire to activate prior knowledge about ecosystems. Then students explore through hands-on discovery. Think rolling objects down ramps to literally test physics concepts themselves. Third, teachers explain, stepping in to help students make sense of their findings by attaching formal terminology to those messy experiences. Fourth, students elaborate, taking that new knowledge and applying it to different, more complex scenarios. And finally, evaluate allows for reflection and feedback. And this last phase is absolutely crucial. It ensures students actually hit pause and reflect on how their thinking has shifted, which is what truly cements that active construction of knowledge.
All right, Section 3, Authenticity, Contextualizing the Learning.
Now that we know how knowledge is constructed, let's shift our focus to why the environment and context of that learning matter just as much as the content itself. This brings us to a really fascinating concept called situated cognition. Think about what happens when we learn vocabulary straight out of a dictionary. Teaching decontextualized words often leads to students writing sentences like, "I was meticulous about falling off the cliff," which is, a pretty funny mental image. But it highlights a really fundamental flaw. Situated cognition argues that knowledge is an integral product of the activity and the culture where it's actually developed. When you separate learning from its real-world use, that knowledge gets brittle. It becomes isolated and, honestly, almost totally useless in practical situations.
And the IB takes this incredibly seriously. As the diploma program documentation very explicitly states, all learning is contextual. Teaching and learning in the diploma program involves a deliberate effort to ground understanding of concepts in context. Basically, meaningful context is the ultimate antidote to shallow learning. It guarantees that a student doesn't just memorize a formula, but actually understands exactly when, how, and why to use it out in the real world.
And we see this authenticity mapped out at two distinct levels. At the macro program level, it's guaranteed by broad organizational frameworks, like the 6 transdisciplinary themes in the primary years program, themes like how we organize ourselves. But down at the unit level, this is where teachers really make it come alive. For example, rather than just reading a textbook chapter about entrepreneurship, students might actually design their own businesses, create real products, and sell them at a school market. That right there is unit-level authenticity in action.
Let's dive into Section 4, Agency, Empowering the Learner.
This is where we talk about fully handing the reins of learning over to the students themselves. Agency is all about empowerment. It means giving students the opportunities to extend and expand their learning far beyond the required curriculum based purely on their own personal initiative. It's literally moving the student out of the passenger seat and putting them directly into the driver's seat of their own educational journey. And when a student feels that kind of genuine ownership over what they are learning, their motivation fundamentally shifts.
Now, to ensure agency actually happens and isn't just some hopeful pie-in-the-sky idea, the IB structures it directly into the planning. At the program level, this takes the form of mandatory, culminating projects that every single student has to complete. At the unit level, though, it looks a whole lot more flexible. We're talking passion projects, genius hours, or just allowing students to pursue extended learning based on whatever genuinely fascinates them during a specific unit. It's actually quite profound when you step back and think about it. This level of structural trust in the student is a radical departure from traditional educational models where the teacher is trying to control every single variable.
Just look at the program-level requirements. From the PYP exhibition in primary school all the way up to the extended essay in the diploma program, the IB standards and practices literally require schools to carve out resources and time for these independent endeavors. These projects are absolute non-negotiables. They guarantee that every student will demonstrate sustained, self-directed action before they move on.
And back at the unit level, agency can look like this beautifully organized chaos. The source material specifically highlights student-designed units. Here, a teacher might provide a basic framework, but the students actually pitch the topics they want to learn about. The class votes, and then get this, they co-create the summative assessment to test their own mastery. The teacher is still there, acting as an expert guide, making sure the chosen topic aligns with valued learning outcomes. But make no mistake, the students are entirely driving the inquiry.
And finally, Section 5, Assessing the Learning Journey.
So we have these 3 incredible pillars: constructivism, authenticity, and agency. But how do they fundamentally change the way we actually evaluate success? Well, assessment in this model isn't just a final endpoint, it is a continuous loop. Formative assessment happens constantly, especially during the evaluate phase of that 5E model we talked about earlier, where students are actively pushed to self-assess and reflect on what they found challenging. Then, summative assessment at the program level honors all 3 pillars by asking students to demonstrate their deep, contextualized knowledge through highly agentic tasks like those exhibitions and extended essays. I mean, think about it. A standard multiple-choice test inherently fails to measure true agency or real-world authenticity. To really evaluate these pillars, the assessments themselves have to be active, they have to be contextual, and they must be student-driven.
We have definitely covered a lot of ground today, looking at how the grand theories of constructivism, authenticity, and agency are meticulously woven into both program-wide strategies and daily unit plans. But I want to leave you with a provocative thought as we wrap up this explainer. Look closely at your own planning or the educational systems around you and ask yourself this: are your units simply guiding passive learners along a predetermined path? Or are the units truly designed to let the learners drive their own learning? Thank you so much for joining me to explore this fascinating blueprint for education. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.